The first alert to local authorities didn't come from the search teams or law enforcement. Instead, it came from a civilian, someone with no official role in the ongoing investigation. This passerby had noticed something unusual, perhaps even unsettling, near the edge of a remote property hidden away from the main roads. Within hours, sheriff's deputies were on site. Every step they took was calculated, following strict protocol to avoid disturbing anything that might prove critical to the case. As the team moved deeper into the isolated area and conducted a detailed sweep, they stumbled upon a grim discovery. A heavy silence fell over the scene as the weight of what they'd found began to take hold. Though there was no official identification yet, the growing sense that the victim might be Mattie cast a somber shadow over everyone present. Dear viewers, in the next video releases, you will find very intriguing and confusing cases. And in order not to miss them, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and please like the video. In this documentary, we'll examine real photos and retrace the true story of Mattie Kingsbury, born on June 1st, 1996, in Minnesota. Mattie was a vibrant, compassionate young woman whose life was deeply rooted in the bonds of family, the joy of raising her 2 children, and the rhythms of a small city nestled along the waterways of southeastern Minnesota. She came from a family that valued warmth and connection, and from a young age, Mattie showed an extraordinary sensitivity toward others. Friends remembered how quick she was to offer help, whether a classmate needed support on a tough assignment or a neighbor faced a sudden crisis. Teachers often described her as curious and kind, a rare blend that made her stand out both academically and socially, allowing her to form meaningful, lasting connections. Growing up in Winona, surrounded by scenic bluffs and winding rivers, Mattie developed a love for the outdoors. She often spent weekends taking peaceful walks or hiking with friends and family. As she entered her teenage years, her social circle widened, and she faced the typical ups and downs of adolescence with a mix of humor and resilience. Mattie was never one to seek the spotlight, but there was a quiet confidence about her, a kind of steady calm that shone through her gentle smile and attentive presence. Those closest to her often said that her warmth was unforgettable. After high school, she channeled her natural curiosity into the study of the human body, pursuing a path that would eventually lead to work in the medical or health field. As she juggled her responsibilities, Mattie built a life centered around the people she loved most. In photos, Mattie often appeared with a soft smile, her eyes reflecting a blend of warmth and determination that left an impression. In these small, everyday moments, she created a sense of peace and structure, especially after becoming a mother. By her mid-20s, Mattie was raising 2 young children, and that shift in her life brought with it a deeper focus. Her mornings began early, preparing breakfast, packing lunches, and getting her children ready for the day. Weekends were filled with errands, time at the park, or quiet evenings spent reading stories before bedtime. Though parenting demanded much of her, she still carved out space for personal joys and small moments of fulfillment. As her children grew, her commitment to giving them both stability and opportunity became even clearer. She dreamed about their futures, encouraged their curiosity, and modeled kindness through everyday actions. Those closest to Mattie noticed how motherhood gave her an even greater sense of purpose. Even in moments of stress, she handled herself with grace and a steadfast devotion to her family. While Mattie poured herself into her role as a mother, she didn't lose sight of her own goals. She often spoke about advancing her career, considering further training or taking on new responsibilities that would help her grow professionally. Still, life in a small city like Winona wasn't always simple. Mattie faced her share of difficulties and heartbreaks, though she rarely shared them publicly. The pressures of balancing work, motherhood, and personal aspirations occasionally left her feeling overwhelmed. But even then, she remained grounded, holding tightly to the love and dreams that shaped her world. On what began as a seemingly ordinary Friday morning in late March, Mattie Kingsbury's day unfolded with the efficient rhythm that characterized much of her life. She rose early, prepared her children's things for daycare, and exchanged light-hearted messages with friends about weekend plans. She had to drop off her little ones and then head to her job. But as the midday hours approached, an unsettling sense began to creep over the people closest to her. Normally, Mattie would check in via text, sometimes a short message about an upcoming appointment or a reminder about pickup times. However, On this particular day, her phone went silent. Hours trickled by, and concerned family members tried calling. But her phone went straight to voicemail, or simply didn't ring at all. In a matter of moments, routines that had always felt comforting and predictable suddenly took on a shadowy cast. Something was off. Friends who had been in regular contact noticed the abrupt end to the lively banter they often shared. And by that evening, anxiety among her loved ones was palpable. Some reached out to one another, hoping for reassurance that there was a simple explanation. Maybe she'd lost her phone, or was stuck in an unexpected meeting at work. But as the evening gave way to night, and no one had heard from her, the concern escalated from worry into a gnawing fear that something far more troubling might have happened. By the following morning, family members and close friends had gathered, trading theories, retracing her last known movements, and making frantic calls to local hospitals, just in case there had been some kind of accident. Nobody could recall a time Mattie had ever gone completely off the grid without telling someone where she was going, especially considering the responsibilities she had as a mother. It was precisely that maternal bond and her dependable nature that made her sudden absence so troubling. Where could she possibly be? It was with a trembling voice that one of her relatives finally made the call to law enforcement reporting her missing. The next few hours would see a flurry of activity as local authorities collected preliminary information, combing through any clue that might shed light on her whereabouts. Officers arrived at Mattie's home, a place typically filled with the laughter of children and the comforting hum of daily life, only to find it eerily silent. Nothing immediately appeared ransacked. There was no obvious sign of a break-in. But there was also no indication of a planned trip, no packed suitcase, no note left behind. Mattie's car was in the driveway, her purse in the house. Her cell phone was unresponsive, and it soon became clear that she hadn't taken her wallet or any other essentials. Investigators took careful note of the meticulously arranged children's belongings, the half-finished grocery list on the kitchen counter, and other signs that suggested a routine day had been abruptly cut short. Within a day or two, news of Mattie's disappearance began to ripple through Winona. Although the community was no stranger to life's hardships, the notion that a vibrant young mother could vanish without explanation struck an especially painful chord among residents. Social media posts spread the word, urging everyone to keep an eye out for any sign of her, whether in town or the surrounding rural areas. Concerned citizens printed flyers bearing her photograph, distributing them to local businesses, gas stations, and neighborhood bulletin boards. In these initial days, the hope was that she had simply gone off the grid, maybe needing a break or sorting out a personal crisis. But as more time passed, that optimism started to dim. The thought of Mattie willingly leaving her children behind felt incomprehensible. Still, her circle of friends refused to succumb to the worst-case scenarios right away. They organized small search groups, coordinating with local law enforcement. Some scoured the roadsides leading into and out of the city, while others checked local hiking trails or parks she was known to frequent. Police officers, meanwhile, began gathering any digital traces that could help: phone records, bank statements, and even a timeline of her social media usage. Officers questioned neighbors about the last time they saw her. Had there been any suspicious cars parked nearby? Any unusual visitors in the neighborhood that morning? Bit by bit, each conversation added a small piece to the puzzle, but it still remained agonizingly incomplete. The local authorities marshaled volunteers, who answered the call in impressive numbers. People from neighboring towns, some of whom had never met Mattie, joined in. Winona's terrain, with its mix of urban spaces and more remote rural areas, made the search both challenging and time-consuming. Groups with flashlights and bright vests fanned out along local trails and the banks of the river. Law enforcement set up a coordination center, mapping out search routes that would systematically cover the region. Community members used social media to organize meeting points, share tips, and post updates about where they had searched and what they had found. While a few leads poured in here and there, someone thought they'd seen a woman matching Mattie's description at a rest stop outside town. Someone else was convinced they had a sighting near a local supermarket. None of these tips panned out. A sense of mounting frustration grew each time another lead vanished into a dead end. Through it all, Mattie's family made public pleas for her safe return. They stood in front of news cameras, their voices filled with tremors of desperation and unwavering love. The heartbreak was visible in their eyes, but so too was an undercurrent of steadfast belief that Mattie would come home. They urged anyone with information to step forward, no matter how insignificant that information might seem. For many, the family's calls for help added an intensely human dimension to the tragedy. This wasn't just a headline. It was a mother, a daughter, a friend. Each day brought a fresh wave of worry. The children continued to ask for their mother, and the family could only offer reassurances that everyone was doing their very best to bring her back. In the background, investigators quietly pieced together a timeline of Mattie's last known hours. They confirmed that she had successfully dropped off her children at daycare that morning, spoke with a co-worker by phone, and may have returned home for a brief interval. But after that point, the narrative became hazy. Some neighbors reported hearing a car door slam around mid-morning. Others noted nothing out of the ordinary. Surveillance footage from nearby streets was sparse, and nothing conclusive turned up on traffic cameras or local security systems. The local police department sought assistance from state authorities, hoping that specialized resources like aerial searches or advanced digital forensics might yield a breakthrough. Helicopters hovered over areas of dense woodland that were tough to navigate on foot, their powerful searchlights sweeping across tree lines and open fields alike. Despite these considerable efforts, day after day ended with the grim realization that they were still no closer to finding Mattie. While the public face of the investigation showed unwavering resolve, behind the scenes, officers admitted the difficulty of the situation. This wasn't a case with easy leads, such as suspicious transactions on a bank card or phone pings from a distant city. Instead, it seemed to be a disappearance with no clear trail. In a tight-knit community like Winona, it was inconceivable to many that anyone could vanish so completely. Tensions rose, especially on social media, where rumors and speculation proliferated. Some online commentators shared theories about foul play, pointing fingers at individuals close to Mattie. Others questioned whether she had arranged her own disappearance, though those who knew her vehemently dismissed the idea, citing her deep ties to her children and her stable working life. In the midst of this digital maelstrom, local law enforcement urged restraint, cautioning against vigilante theories and public accusations. They emphasized that real investigations require patience, a careful sifting of evidence, and respect for due process. The community responded for the most part by rallying behind the family and continuing to volunteer in the search. Each day ended with group debriefings, where volunteers recounted which specific sectors had been canvassed and what items had been found: a stray shoe, a discarded sweater, a piece of plastic that might have come from a cell phone case. In most instances, these objects bore no link to Mattie, but the searchers held on to the faint hope that they were getting closer. Even so, the strain on all involved was evident. After weeks of fruitless searching, the anguish surrounding Mattie Kingsbury's disappearance continued to spread through the community like a slow, heavy fog. Volunteers who had once eagerly turned out in droves each morning found themselves wrestling with exhaustion, yet they persisted, driven by a determination to bring closure to her family. Law enforcement maintained a consistent presence across Winona and its surrounding rural areas, systematically rechecking any leads that might have fallen through the cracks. By now, every wooded trail, every abandoned building, and every cluster of farmlands had been scrutinized at least once, if not multiple times. Rumors and theories churned in the background. Some speculated that Mattie might have traveled far beyond the local region. Others whispered about potential foul play, though no concrete evidence had emerged to confirm such a theory. For her loved ones, each passing day increased the dread that they might never uncover answers. Yet within a matter of weeks, a discovery came to light in a place that many had only cursorily reviewed: a quiet corner of Fillmore County marked by dense tree cover and winding backroads. For the investigators who responded, the location was a grim testament to just how easily a life could be hidden away from sight. Local authorities had first been tipped off by a passerby, someone who wasn't even part of an organized search team but had ventured off the beaten path for personal reasons. The person noticed something unsettling near the edge of a secluded property. At first, they dismissed it as the result of storm runoff or animal activity, yet a nagging intuition compelled them to look closer. Recognizing that this could be relevant to Mattie's case, or perhaps another missing person situation, they promptly phoned the local sheriff's office. Within hours, uniformed deputies arrived, accompanied by crime scene specialists who set up a wide perimeter to preserve potential evidence. Though the area itself wasn't sprawling, the thick canopy cast a perpetual dusk over the site. The hush of the forest was broken only by muted conversations among law enforcement officials, the beep of forensic equipment, and the occasional chirp of wildlife disturbed by the human intrusion. In the initial moments, there was no certainty about whose might be there, but a solemn air descended over the searchers, as though they collectively braced for what they might find. Methodically, crime scene technicians began to clear away layers of foliage and brush, guided by an established protocol to minimize the risk of contaminating vital evidence. It didn't take long for them to make a preliminary identification that this was indeed a potential site. As they descended deeper and examined the crime scene more closely, they discovered a person. The reaction was instantaneous and deeply sobering. Faces that had been set in determined focus now bore the weight of sorrow. Even without formal identification, the possibility that it was Mattie deeply unsettled everyone present. Officers called in more specialized units, including forensic anthropologists, to handle this sensitive task with the utmost care and respect. The area was cordoned off even further, keeping the circle of authorized personnel as tight as possible, both out of respect for the victim and to ensure an uncontaminated investigation. News spread quickly that a person had been found near the Winona County border. Information spread not only within law enforcement channels but also on social media, where local residents who had been following Mattie's story from the beginning latched onto this new development. Concerned citizens, plagued by equal parts fear and hope, flooded the official tip line with questions and offers of help. The general refrain was hauntingly consistent. Please let it not be her. But if it is, at least her family can have answers. Local reporters, well aware of the public's interest, kept a respectful distance from the scene, but provided measured updates. Humans have been discovered in a remote area, and officials are working to confirm the identity. Behind these cautious statements, there was an unspoken tension. This was possibly the most significant lead in the entire case. Everyone recognized that a formal identification could forever alter the narrative that had thus far been marked by worry and speculation. Forensic teams worked meticulously. Under the dappled light penetrating the canopy, they photographed, logged, and collected everything in the immediate vicinity. Pieces of clothing that might have withstood the elements, fragments of personal items, even soil samples for further analysis. Each artifact was placed in a sealed container, labeled with precise location data, then sent for laboratory testing. The process was slow and deliberate, in stark contrast to the frantic searches of the previous weeks. Investigators knew that a single oversight here could jeopardize the integrity of the entire case. They also knew that the family was hanging on the edge of uncertainty, desperate for a final confirmation or denial. While most of the public would only see a few brief news clips summarizing these procedures, the gravity of the situation was deeply felt by anyone who stepped foot on that cordoned-off patch of earth. Once enough evidence had been collected at the scene, were respectfully transported to the medical examiner's office for a thorough identification process. Specialists in forensic pathology and forensic odontology were consulted. Dental records, DNA samples, and other biographical markers would eventually be used to determine the victim's identity with as much certainty as possible. During the days it took for these tests to be run, tension mounted in Winona and beyond. People gathered in small groups at local diners, whispering in hushed tones about the site of the discovery. Family members, close friends, and community volunteers who had poured their hearts into the search tried to maintain composure, while privately preparing themselves for the most likely outcome. If this evidence belonged to Mattie, it meant a tragic end to a weeks-long hope that she might still be alive somewhere. If the evidence turned out to belong to someone else, it would mean the town still had no answers about what became of her, leaving them back at square one, a fate nearly as agonizing. During this interim, law enforcement issued measured statements, avoiding speculation. They advised the community that while a discovery had been made, official identification was still pending. Their subdued caution spoke volumes. Few believed they would go to such lengths if there weren't strong indicators connecting to Mattie. At the family's request, members of the public maintained a respectful distance from the site and refrained from overloading social media with unverified claims. Nevertheless, the conversation was impossible to contain entirely. Some online discussions ventured into theories about who might have been responsible for placing Mattie in such a remote spot. Others questioned how thorough the original search of that area had been, or why the evidence were only discovered weeks after she disappeared. Conspiracy theories bloomed, as they often do in high-profile missing person cases, but local law enforcement consistently urged everyone to let the investigative process unfold without interference. A little over a week after were discovered, the medical examiner's office released a preliminary identification. It was, indeed, Mattie Kingsbury. While further forensic examinations were necessary to determine how she happened and whether any additional evidence could be recovered from the crime scene, one heartbreaking fact has now been made public. The missing mother, whose face became a symbol of grief in Winona, will not be coming home. The news spread across the city in a wave of sorrow and reluctant acceptance. Those who had steadfastly believed in her safe return felt the impact of reality. Friends and relatives offered public and private messages of condolence, referencing the shining aspects of Mattie's life, her devotion, her warmth, her bright future, while struggling to comprehend the magnitude of this loss. In an official press conference, the police chief stood before a podium with a heavy heart, articulating the feelings that had permeated the force since day one of the investigation. Confirming Mattie's identity brought a sense of closure to one pressing question, he noted, but it also ignited a new determination to learn what truly happened. The chief refused to give specific details about the manner of death, citing the ongoing investigation and the respect owed to Mattie's family. Meanwhile, the district attorney hinted that this case had been a top priority from the outset, and that now, with the discovery of her, the urgency to identify possible perpetrators was even higher. In the aftermath of the grim discovery that confirmed Mattie Kingsbury's fate, the investigation pivoted with renewed urgency toward identifying who was responsible and concealing it so deliberately. While the public, and even some members of law enforcement, had harbored early suspicions, no single piece of evidence was initially strong enough to trigger an immediate arrest. Yet as forensic specialists pieced together findings from the scene in Fillmore County, investigators also circled back to individuals who had known Mattie intimately. Among these, Adam Fravel, the father of her children, and reportedly the last person to see her alive, came under intensified scrutiny. In the earliest stages of the search, Adam had publicly professed concern for Mattie's well-being, but elements of his behavior raised quiet, persistent questions among authorities. Some neighbors recalled inconsistent remarks he had made about the day of her disappearance, while others noted a tension in his demeanor that seemed more guarded than simply grief-stricken. Still, law enforcement refrained from making any swift judgments, aware that a hunch or suspicion was not the same as proof. Once Mattie's were identified, however, officers obtained warrants to collect comprehensive digital data, from phone communication logs to email exchanges, as well as to conduct a thorough forensic examination of the shared residence and any vehicles associated with him. In that process, they unearthed troves of text messages that hinted at mounting disagreements in the weeks leading up to her disappearance, some involving finances, others touching on the relationship's deteriorating trust. More pivotal, phone location records painted a pattern that was difficult to explain innocently. Adam's device appeared to linger in the vicinity of the property in Fillmore County around the critical time frame when Mattie was believed to have been there. Furthermore, the car he regularly drove showed microscopic traces of evidence that forensic analysts suspected to be consistent with the site where Mattie's was ultimately recovered. Though the details remained largely confidential at first, word spread that investigator had compiled a substantial circumstantial case. This spurred a wave of speculation online and in local circles, with the city of Winona itself seeming to hold its breath in the days before any formal charges were announced. The public, still reeling from the heartbreak of learning Mattie's fate, now demanded accountability, and many expressed alarms at the notion that someone she had once trusted could be implicated in her death. During press conferences, the police chief acknowledged the delicate balance between maintaining investigative integrity and addressing the community's urgent pleas for information. The break many had been waiting for came when law enforcement officially named Adam Fravel a person of interest, and then, within a short span, effected his arrest. A hush spread over the city when officers escorted him away in handcuffs, a stark image that confirmed the suspicions that had simmered for weeks. Officially, he was charged with second-degree murder, a step authority took because of the evidence they had on hand at the time. The district attorney, in a carefully worded statement, noted that the charge could be elevated depending on the final results of forensic analyses and additional testimonial evidence. In the days following his arrest, Adam appeared in court wearing the same expression of subdued anxiety he'd displayed from the beginning. Though he pleaded not guilty, the judge ruled that he should be held without bail, citing the severity of the allegations and the potential flight risk. From there, the pretrial phase became a meticulous process of building or contesting the prosecution's case. Prosecutors combed through hours of phone records, digital correspondence, and witness statements. They also leaned on forensic breakthroughs, including soil samples found on Adam's clothing and in the trunk of his vehicle, which, according to expert testimony, could be matched to the exact environment of the wooded patch where evidence was discovered. Defense attorneys countered that many items of evidence were circumstantial, and that the presence of certain materials in a car trunk did not necessarily point to guilt. However, prosecutors anticipated such arguments and introduced location data that placed Adam's phone in suspiciously precise correlation with the location. They compiled a timeline of events that encompassed not only the morning of Mattie's disappearance, but also the subsequent days, during which Adam's digital footprint appeared painstakingly quiet. Combined with the earlier messages that suggested tension in the relationship, the prosecution's narrative took shape. They argued that Adam had both motive and opportunity. They alleged that when Mattie confronted him about deeper issues, possibly financial stress, custody concerns, or personal conflict, an altercation escalated, culminating. The defense, for its part, attempted to dismantle the motive narrative, portraying Adam as a worried father who was traumatized by the sudden loss and had perhaps chosen to grieve in a way that might appear suspicious to an outside observer. Yet as the pretrial motions concluded and the case headed toward jury selection, public sentiment in Winona continued to lean heavily toward believing that Adam was indeed responsible. Journalists, spurred by statements from anonymous sources close to the investigation, reported that a key witness, possibly a friend or family member, had come forward with information about Adam's demeanor on the day Mattie went missing, sharing anecdotal accounts of urgent phone calls, unexplained absences, or contradictory stories. Throughout the trial proceedings, the courtroom brimmed with tension. The prosecution meticulously walked the jury through each critical piece of evidence: phone pings, digital messages, testimony from forensic technicians, and the results of advanced testing on the soil and organic matter recovered from Adam's vehicle. The attorneys also called in experts to discuss probable time of death based on the findings, providing a window that more or less aligned with the hours immediately after Mattie was last seen alive. The emotional core of the trial, however, came from the friends and family who took the stand and spoke about Mattie's devotion to her children, underscoring how improbable it was that she would abandon them voluntarily, an argument that countered the defense's subtle suggestions that she might have left of her own accord or met with an unknown third party. Meanwhile, the defense attempted to focus on the absence of a single, indisputable piece of direct evidence, like eyewitness testimony, or a coherent video timeline capturing Adam in the act. They contended that phone data can be misinterpreted, that suspicious behavior might not equal guilt, and that other unidentified individuals could have been responsible. Still, as witness after witness recounted the last time Mattie was seen, and expert after expert tied the forensic trail back to Adam, the gravity of his predicament loomed large. Public opinion, once a swirl of rumor, coalesced. Adam Fravel likely faced the possibility of the maximum penalty if convicted. In each cross-examination, the prosecution highlighted the stark inconsistencies in his recollection of events, contrasting them with the phone records and accounts from those who had interacted with him. A pivotal moment came when the lead detective testified about a recorded interview with Adam, in which he apparently shifted his narrative multiple times, initially claiming not to have left home that day, but later admitting he might have taken a drive to clear his head. Though the defense insisted that confusion and stress could easily lead to contradictory statements, the prosecution branded this as a calculated evasion, aimed at covering up an irreparable crime. Day after day, as the jury listened, the weight of the evidence seemed to accumulate in the prosecution's favor. As the jurors filed out to deliberate, the general sentiment among courthouse observers was that the evidence had been overwhelmingly stacked in favor of the prosecution's narrative. Over the course of a few tense days, the jury pored over the exhibits, transcripts of testimony, and hours of recorded interviews. On the final day of deliberations, word spread through Winona that a verdict had been reached. On the day of sentencing, the courtroom was once again packed, the atmosphere taut with finality. Adam remained visibly guarded, speaking only when prompted by the judge. The sentence handed down underscored the court's view that his crime represented a betrayal of the intimate trust that once bound him to Mattie. Ultimately, Adam Fravel was found guilty on November 7, 2024. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.